In a shocking turn of events, it looks like the Biden administration is looking to ease the sanctions on Venezuela, on Dictator Maduro. We need their oil to deal with the sanctions that we've just placed on Russia. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend, ally with the lesser of two bad guys. Whatever is going on here, it is geopolitical shenanigans that have happened since the beginning of time, always resulting in unintended consequences, like in World War II, when we allied with the communists to defeat the Nazis. We made friends with the bad guys to defeat the other bad guys. That's what America has been doing for decades, propping up dictators, establishing new governments, making friendly ties with terrible, terrible regimes in order to accomplish our goals. And it is no different what is happening right now. Ready? Let's dive in. All right, so I've got a book recommendation for you that has to do with the topics of this video. That is Enough Already by Scott Horton. I've got it linked in the description below. And yes, that book has to do with ending these endless and useless and catastrophic wars that the United States has been involved in and starting and continuing for decades. And you'll see why that has to do with what we are talking about today. Look with me at this article from CNN. The U.S. is going to ease some energy sanctions on Venezuela. So if we take a look at what's going on here, the first step will allow Chevron, which is the last major U.S. oil company still operating in Venezuela, to negotiate its license with state-owned oil company PDVSA to continue operations in the country. Now, first of all, what this highlights is that when the government decides to attack or to protect something, there are always winners and losers. So with sanctions, with tariffs, with taxes, with regulations, there's always going to be some winners and some losers. And in the case of these Venezuela sanctions, Chevron has been a big winner. They are the last U.S. company still operating in Venezuela. I wonder how they are still operating there despite the sanctions, despite how difficult it has been. And I wonder, it probably doesn't, but I wonder how much of that has to do with their lobbyists. Let's read on. The U.S. will continue to calibrate its sanctions towards Venezuela by strengthening or alleviating on the basis of ambitious, concrete, and irreversible outcomes. And here's the key here. This is where we see what the true motives are. Outcomes that empower the Venezuelan people to determine the future in their country through democratic elections. Now, I'm sure you guys have all seen the memes over the years that have popped up every time a country has discovered oil. There's a meme of a bald eagle or some US soldiers saying, man, I guess they need some democracy now, making fun of the fact that the United States for decades has been invading countries, mostly in the Middle East, propping up our own governments there, destroying the regimes that were there before, and propping up our own regimes there that are friendly to the United States, and hoping that the people will just roll over and take it. Imagine for a second what Americans would do if, let's say, China came in, started bombing us from the sky, from drones, took out all of our government leaders, established a new government here, claimed it was for democracy and fairness, but that government was friendly, very friendly towards China. Do you think any American would be okay with that? Absolutely not. Just to get a glimpse of what this does, trying to prop up your own government in another country, this idea of empire, just to get an idea of what that does to the mindset of the people. We've been attacked once on our soil in recent history, 9/11. To this day, we still have people signing up, giving their lives to go to war and defend this country on the basis of making sure that never happens again. One attack on our soil, and to this day, decades later, we still have 18-year-olds signing up to give their lives to defend this country. Imagine what would happen to the rest of our country if it was a continuous attack on our soil, if our government had been completely knocked down and a new one set up in its place. Now you see why our regime changes in the Middle East have never worked, because Every single person living there has grown up with a foreign invader trying to establish a new government there and bombing people with collateral damage, which is just a friendly way of saying killing kids, women, and civilians that have nothing to do with the war effort. It is not really that hard to imagine why this has backfired on us for decades, why it has been bankrupting our country for decades. And so on the basis of establishing a democracy in Venezuela, releasing some sanctions, trying to say, hey, we will be more friendly to you and stop our oppression of your country, which the United States, that's what these sanctions have been. We've stopped them from engaging in international economic activity. Look, I'm not making a defense of Maduro. I'm not making a defense of dictatorships, of totalitarian control. Quite the opposite, actually, because what the United States is doing around the entire world is imposing its own totalitarian, authoritarian control over global and international trade and sovereignty of nations. And now that we need something that they have, now we'll be more friendly to them because we're not energy independent ourselves. We've left that boat, we've burned those bridges, we've burned down those ships, and we're stranded on this island now. So now that we are going after Russia, well, suddenly we need energy. So where can we get it from? We got to go back to an enemy that we've made in the past and try and make good with them. Now, according to this article from Bloomberg, easing these sanctions would allow European firms that are operating the country to send oil immediately. This is to alleviate some of the pressures that specifically Europe is feeling right now. Massive energy crisis over there right now. Number one, because they've made absolutely stupid decisions for the past decade about shutting down clean energy production, nuclear, moving towards unstable energy production, wind and solar, and now they've been more and more dependent on gas and oil from Russia, which is the biggest producer of energy over there. They've been more and more dependent on that because they've moved away from actually dependent sources of energy like nuclear. They've had to subsidize their unstable wind and solar energy production with gas and oil from Russia. And so now they're going to Venezuela and they're saying, hey, let's ease these sanctions. We can send more energy from Venezuela to ease some of the pressure on Europe. But it does signal that Venezuelan oil may be able to come to the US as well, in addition to it going to Europe. But as I said earlier, there are always unintended consequences, and one of them could be agitating a major player in this world, China, because a lot of Venezuela oil is bound for China, and this would divert that Venezuelan oil that is headed for China and make it go to Europe instead. Now, China's probably in no trouble from this because they can get Russian oil. However, this is a big deal. China has been developing relationships all around the Eastern Hemisphere, in Latin America, in Africa, in the East, Southeast Asia, all over the place, and many countries are now trying to decide, hey, for the future, is it more advantageous to us to keep our allegiance with the United States and the West, or to shift our attention eastward because China's rise is so quick? Yes, they've got a lot of problems, not denying that, but it is a fact that many countries are weighing their options right now. At the end of the day, the move to alleviate sanctions on Venezuela, I believe, is the right move. But I also believe that a move to alleviate sanctions on Russia is also the right move. I don't think that any country, any government has the right to try and impose its will on any other country. I don't believe that the use of violence should be used to coerce any person into doing something that they don't freely want to choose to do themselves. That includes the initiation of violence on invading a country, on establishing a totalitarian dictatorship over a country. No defense there. But two wrongs don't make a right. It doesn't make it right for another country to come in and say, hey, because you're doing this, we're going to do the same thing, potentially even worse to you. Especially when the only motive for doing so is to get something that they want. Like in the case of Venezuela, now that they have something we need, this oil, now we're relieving sanctions. Not a good look. Freedom is the path forward, allowing voluntary association and freedom of choice so that people can choose to associate with each other, choose to exchange, and not have any coercion or manipulation or fraud or deceit imposed on those transactions. In the words of Matt Ridley, innovation is the child of freedom and the parent of prosperity. If we want to see a bright future ahead of us, the path forward is freedom, not oppression. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and check out that book, Enough Already by Scott Horton, linked in the description below. Have a great day.